Good afternoon, colleagues. This is meeting number 105 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Thursday, June 14th, 2018. And just for our guests, right now, as Madam Mendez was saying, there is a tribute to Mr. Mulcair going on, and so Mr. Christofferson will be with us momentarily. And we did try to hold off as long as we could, just so that members could be there for that event. I should also say that we are televised today, so I would encourage all those in the audience, those media, those members of committee, to take your cell phones and please put them on vibrate or silent or whatever setting you have that would diminish the distractions. And we would certainly appreciate that and thank you in advance. We are here today in consideration of Report 1, Building and Implementing the Phoenix Pay System, of the 2018 Spring Reports of the Auditor General of Canada. We are honoured to have with us this afternoon from the Auditor General's Office, Mr. Michael Ferguson, Auditor General of Canada, and Monsieur Jean Goulet, Principal. From the Department of Public Works and Government Services, Ms. Marie Lemay, Deputy Minister, and Les Linklater, Associate Deputy Minister. And from the Treasury Board Secretariat, we welcome Mr. Peter Wallace, Secretary of the Treasury Board of Canada, and Ms. Sandra Hassan, Assistant Deputy Minister, Compensation and Labour Relations Sector. So welcome to all. We look forward to your comments, and we will open this afternoon's committee meeting hearing from our Auditor General. Mr. Ferguson, please.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present the results of our second audit of the Phoenix Pay System, in which we looked at building and implementing the system. Joining me at the table is Jean Goulet, the Principal who was responsible for the 2 audits of Phoenix. In 2009, Public Services and Procurement Canada started its Transformation of Pay Administration initiative to transform the way it processed pay for its 290,000 employees. There were 2 projects, one to centralize pay services for 46 departments and agencies that employed 70% of all federal employees, and the other to replace the 40-year-old pay system used by 101 departments and agencies.
In this audit, we reviewed Public Services and Procurement Canada's development and implementation of the Phoenix Pay System. We examined whether the decision to launch the new pay system included considerations of whether the system was fully tested, functional, and secure, and whether it would protect employees' personal information. We concluded that the Phoenix project was an incomprehensible failure of project management and project oversight, which led to the decision to implement a system that was not ready. In order to meet budgets and timelines, Public Services and Procurement Canada decided to remove critical pay functions, curtail system tests, and forego a pilot implementation of the system.
There were obvious signs that the Miramichi Pay Centre wasn't ready to handle the volume of pay transactions, that departments and agencies weren't ready to migrate to the new system, and that Phoenix itself wasn't ready to correctly pay federal government employees. When the Phoenix executives informed the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada that Phoenix would launch, they didn't mention significant problems that they knew about. Finally, the decision to launch Phoenix wasn't documented. In our view, based on the information available at the time, the decision to launch Phoenix was wrong. Phoenix doesn't do what it was supposed to do. It has cost hundreds of millions of dollars more than planned, and it has affected tens of thousands of federal government employees and their families.
In my opinion, when I look back at our first audit of Phoenix pay problems, there were 3 issues that were in common to both the Phoenix implementation project and the department's response to the post-implementation problems. There was a lack of oversight or governance to guide management activities, a lack of engagement with affected departments, and an underappreciation of the seriousness of the problems. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We'd be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move to Ms. Lemay, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm joined by our Associate Deputy Minister, Les Linkletter. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before the committee to discuss the Auditor General's latest study of the Phoenix PACE system. Public Service and Procurement Canada accepts the Auditor General's recommendation. Before I discuss the measures that PSPC will be taking in response to the Auditor General's report, I want to emphasize that this is, above all, about people. Problems with the PACE system have taken a heavy toll on our employees. It is an unacceptable situation for which I am deeply sorry. I want to assure you that we have a dedicated group of people working very hard to address their colleagues' pay issue.
The Auditor General's Spring Report examines the planning and development of Phoenix from April 2008 to April 2016. We recognize that there were serious flaws in the planning and implementation of Phoenix, and in the broader transformation of pay administration initiative. Cost and timelines were prioritized and constrained the outcomes of this project. Poor decisions were made against this backdrop. Critical elements of the project, including system functionality, testing, change management, and training, were removed or deferred. These decisions, coupled with the elimination of 700 compensation positions and the resulting loss of critical capacity and expertise, led to a government-wide transformation that couldn't perform as planned. It also meant that the government was unprepared for this significant change. Within the senior levels of PSPC, and I would also like to say across the government, the project's scope and implications were vastly underestimated. The Goss-Gilroy report also cited this fundamental gap as a central failing of the project.
Wanted this to happen or acted with ill intent. However, without question, the development and the implementation of the project was severely flawed. It is clear that the 2 senior executives leading the project who reported to the Deputy Minister did not properly assess the complexity of the undertaking, the cumulative impact of their decisions, or the seriousness of the early warnings. The performance of these senior executives has been assessed and appropriate measures have been taken. They are no longer involved in the pay administration, and they did not receive performance pay for their work on Phoenix during the 2015-16 when the system was finalized and launched. As I mentioned, this situation has caused significant stress for many employees, and understandably, people want someone to blame. What has happened is unacceptable. The Auditor General has identified that senior executives at PSPC made significant mistakes, but he's also acknowledged that there were oversights and governance issues. And I believe that there were multiple points of failure, and we have to learn from all of them. Accountability needs to be coupled with authority for projects like the pay transformation to succeed. Public Service and Procurement Canada officials had full authority over Phoenix, but not over the government-wide human resource processes, for example. We should have had an integrated HR to pay approach all along. Mr. Chair, we must ensure that these mistakes are not repeated. We need to do better. We need to give our people the tools and the environment needed to succeed. The Auditor General's report provides advice that is helping us move forward.
I'd like to talk now to the specific recommendation offered by the Auditor General in his Spring Report with focus on future planning of government-wide IT projects. PSPC has a long history of managing large-scale, complex projects. pension modernization, and long-term vision and plan for the parliamentary precinct are amongst the 430 projects we currently manage for our department, which represent a total budget of over $13 billion. Currently, we also manage 2,400 projects for other government departments. Managing large-scale projects requires rigorous and effective processes. While PSPC has these processes in place, our experience with Phoenix has highlighted the need for an enhanced approach to managing complex, enterprise-wide IT projects. To address that need, PSPC will develop a tool to help us determine whether specific projects under our responsibility should be managed through an enhanced government-wide IT project management approach or through departmental project management practices and processes. We will also develop an enhanced project management playbook that will outline how government-wide IT projects are to be managed and will address governance and oversight, project management principles, respective roles and responsibilities, and the audit function, among other aspects. This tool and the playbook will help ensure that we have robust governance and oversight for all government-wide IT projects under our responsibility, as recommended by the Auditor General. Furthermore, this approach will include a stakeholder engagement plan in projects, as well as a formal software upgrade plan and a comprehensive contingency plan. We will ensure that internal audits provide the Deputy Minister with the appropriate assurances regarding project governance, oversight and management. We are going to make sure that the Deputy Minister has access to independent advice.
Hard to make a more fundamental change to how the department operates. A change that goes beyond the technical and project management practices. As you know and have heard, we have a recognized world-class public service. Having said that, there is always room to improve. And within PSPC, we are working very hard to foster a workplace culture where employees feel free to have honest discussions, ask tough questions, and speak candidly when the situation calls for it. For example, the Public Service Pay Centre has taken great stride over the last 18 months to build an environment that fosters employee engagement. This approach has fostered employee-led solutions that are helping us work through the backlog, improve working conditions, and provide better client service. Within the broader department, we've initiated a transformation to change the way we work, change the way we deliver service, and green the way we work. Our transformation team has met with employees at all levels to have discussions about the type of culture we have and the one we aspire to. I am personally overseeing the culture element of our transformation. This won't be accomplished overnight, but it's important work that demands sustained attention. We have developed a roadmap and have started on our journey. In February 2017, I appointed the first mental health ombudsman, an independent function that reports to me directly. He has met with close to 500 employees so far, providing a safe space and guidance as to the tools and help available. He has produced 2 reports to me, and we're implementing the recommendations. Mr. Chair, we are committed to sustained efforts in that area. Moving forward, however, our immediate priority remains helping employees experience pay issue. I'd like to take a moment to highlight our recent efforts and the positive impact that they're having. So in May, Minister Qualtrough,
In May, Minister Qualtrough announced the rollout of the new PayPod approach to stabilize the system and better support employees. PayPods are teams of pay specialists who are assigned to exclusively serve specific departments or agencies. In the 3 departments that participated in the pilot project, PayPods reduced overall case backlog by 30% overall, and their backlog older than 30 days has gone down by 41%. These are promising results, and we are optimistic about the rollout of PayPods over the next year.
Capacity and capability to address employee pay issue. We have nearly tripled the number of compensation staff from 550 when Phoenix was implemented to over 1,600. We have improved the quality of service provided by the client service contact center. And before, service representatives could only give employees the status of their cases. Service representatives now have direct access to pay files and can provide employees with detailed pay information when they call the center. While there is still much to be done, we are beginning to see slow but steady progress. With the exception of a small fluctuation in our case backlog has steadily declined for 4 straight months. The PACE Centre processed 5,000 more cases than it received in April and 25 more in May. We expect this positive trend will continue as the PPODs are expended. So, Mr. Chair, paying public servants on time and correctly is our department's top priority, and we are working relentlessly to make that happen. Moving forward, we must learn from the mistakes that were made. We must encourage a culture shift that inspired frank, open discussion. And lastly, we must ensure something like this never happens again. Alors, merci beaucoup pour votre...
Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Much, Ms. Lemay. We'll now turn to Mr. Wallace, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today to discuss the Auditor General's report on building and implementing Phoenix. This is an important dialogue, and I want to emphasize that I personally welcome it and look forward to being of assistance to this committee and to other parliamentary committees. I am pleased to be here with Sandra Hassan, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Compensation and Labour Relations for Treasury Board Secretariat. Comme vous le savez, le Conseil du Trésor...
As you know, the Treasury Board is the employer of the core public service. And as its secretary, I support the board in that role. As such, I want to begin by stating that the government is resolutely focused on meeting its responsibility to pay its employees accurately and on time. Of course.
Pay issues that affect their lives and those of their families, and we take that obviously extremely seriously. That is why we are working diligently and will continue to do so to resolve these pay issues and also help those employees who have been adversely affected. For example, we are making sure that advances are made and paid on a priority basis. We have also provided flexibility in the recovery of overpayments, and we have set up claims processes to compensate employees for expenses or financial losses because of Phoenix. These measures are aimed at mitigation and undoing some of the damages that has been done. Obviously, we're also working closely with Madame Lemay and Public Service PSPC, which are leading the enormous effort to stabilize the pay system. That does lead me to the AG's recent report and his concerns that the AG may not be the last incomprehensible failure in project management. We are obviously deeply concerned by that finding, take that enormously seriously, and are determined to learn the lessons associated with that and ensure that we mitigate future risks and deal with these issues. And IT projects are always risky in a way that helps us position going forward. In 2017, Treasury Board Secretariat did commission the Goss-Gilroy report to examine some of the very issues raised by the Auditor General. The report does outline a series of valuable lessons that we are now applying to government projects. That report, along with the Auditor General's recommendations, form foundational guidance for how government will manage projects in the future. That is an ongoing lesson and something we are committed to do. I would like now to turn briefly to the recommendation for the Treasury Board Secretariat in this most recent Auditor General report. Selon cette recommandation, pour tous les projets...
It states that TBS should, for all government-wide information technology projects, carry out independent reviews of the project's key decisions to proceed or not. And inform the project's responsible deputy minister and senior executives of the review's conclusions.
And we will conduct independent reviews of government-wide projects as Treasury Board to identify and implement any required corrective actions. We will communicate the conclusions and remedial actions required, and we will, of course, follow up on that. In the interim, we are changing the role of the Chief Information Officer to further ensure that government-wide IT initiatives are well planned and that we stay on top of the execution of those initiatives. We are also strengthening our policies and improving governance.
I would now like to update you on the progress we have made on the Auditor General's 2 recommendations from his fall report.
along with our colleagues in PSPC, establish timelines for departments and agencies to submit accurate pay information, and that we support our colleagues in PSPC and departments and agencies in the development of performance measures to track and report on the accuracy and timeliness of pay. I can report that the Secretariat, in collaboration with PSPC, is making good progress, and we will provide the information to this committee as soon as possible. The second recommendation was that the Secretariat, with the support of PSPC, along with departments and agencies, track and report back on the cost of resolving pay problems and implementing a sustainable solution. The Office of the Comptroller General has been working diligently on a government-wide cost estimate covering historical costs. The projected investments need to stabilize the Phoenix system and, of course, the operating costs. The model is in place. We are undertaking the runs of that model. It is nearly done, but we are also making sure that the information is verified with our colleagues in PSPC. The report has not yet been finalized, and I apologize for the delay in releasing the report. We expect to have it done shortly. It is important, however, learning the lessons of Phoenix, that we get this accurate, and we are prioritizing accuracy over timeliness in this regard. We will be sharing it, of course, with the committee as soon as we possibly can. J'aimerais maintenant attirer votre attention sur...
Now, I would like to draw your attention to the commitments in 2018 to solve the current Phoenix issues. In the budget, we set out $16 million for PSPC to work with specialists, unions, and IT specialists on the next stage to implement a new pay system.
A relentless focus on the user and a system that links HR transactions with pay transactions. As much as we'd like this to happen overnight or as quickly as possible, the reality is that we will need to take some time to get this right. That's an absolutely critical lesson. That means thoroughly applying all of the lessons, governance, structures, and other approaches that we have learned through the very difficult lessons of Phoenix to this work on a going forward basis. In conclusion, I would like to restate that my department, along with the senior management team, remain fully engaged on this file, and we welcome and appreciate the dialogue with the Auditor General and with parliamentarians on this vitally important issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallace, for your testimony. We'll now move into the first round of questioning. It's a 7-minute round, and we'll go to Ms. Mendez, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci à vous tous d'être ici encore une fois.
Thank you all for being with us today. First,
Of your statement, you said 25 instead of 25,000, and considering that 25,000 is a very good number, I'd like it to be on the record.
Merci.
So, désolé.
No, merci. I'm sorry, that wasn't the correct figure. Also, I just wanted to stress the fact that you weren't the deputy in charge when the system was implemented. Neither of you were there at the time. But I see that you still have taken many initiatives and acted on the Auditor General's report to start to address a lot of these issues. There's something that struck me during the meeting we had with the clerk of the Privy Council last Tuesday. Mr. Warnick and Mr. Furnick both agree that the Phoenix system is a failure. Both of them agree. But it was the notion whether this failure was incomprehensible or not that was in question. I heard what you've had to say in your interpretation of the recommendations that were provided through the two reports of the Auditor General. And now I would like to know what you think. In your opinion, are the errors that were committed in the preparation and the implementation of the Phoenix Pay system, are they comprehensible or incomprehensible? Can we learn lessons from these and correct these errors? Of course, with hindsight, yes. We can draw lessons from these mistakes, and we are doing so. And we're going to apply the lessons we've learned. Mr. Ferguson.
More in how we got there, not necessarily the mistakes that were made. We understand the mistakes that were made. It's just we don't understand why those mistakes were made or were allowed to be made. Is that how it was incomprehensible for you?
So certainly, right, there is that nuance to that word incomprehensible in this context is, yes, you can look at and you can understand all of the different decision points that were made and how those decision points, the decisions that were made at those points led to implementing Phoenix when it was not ready to be implemented. However, as I said, a number of times before, to me it is incomprehensible to understand how it could have been allowed to happen. And the way I've described that as well, again, is with all of the different controls in place in government that are there to prevent something like Phoenix from happening. How was it possible that it could have happened?
That it got there. Well, I think I got that, and I understood that the nuance was there, was more in the how could it happen if we have all this, and now we understand what happened, we know where the mistakes were made. But je vais quand même revenir à...
I'd just like to go back to a few of the points you shared with us, Ms. Lemay, including the fact that the priority for 2009, when they decided to change the pay system, was given to costs and timelines. But very little priority was given to the final objective of the new pay system. I've heard this often, more than once, that the government should be more concerned, less concerned with bids, but more focused on the results that they are striving for. There should be less stress on costs or timelines that we have to respect. In your opinion, is this part of the culture that we have to change within the government in dealing with bidders? Costs and timelines are always important. However, they shouldn't dominate the decision-making process. What we've learned with time is that we have to invest quite often to reap the benefits of our investments. And we have to spend more time planning upstream and take the time to invest to properly verify what's going on. And yes, this is a practice that has to be implemented. Obviously, we can all agree that if we had kept the experts within the public service, they would have been in a better place to inform and educate the Miramichi Pay Center employees. You needed a pay system. It would have worked better. Well, that's how I see things. We're not going to retire all these people because they have expertise and knowledge of the system before we've really tested and reassured everyone that the new pay system will work and we'll be able to manage all the cases. It also proves that we've had 1,600 employees at the pay center versus the 500 or 600 that were planned. So it proves that we didn't have enough human expertise. As I said, I wasn't there during the planning part of the project, but what became very obvious, I was there when the project was implemented, that we were already behind right from the start. We lost our capacity, and training wasn't done properly. Change management wasn't up to par. There was a lot of factors at play. But we didn't have this capacity, and therefore we couldn't face these challenges. And we were just catching up. As soon as in June, when we announced that we had a satellite office, we committed to this, but people were no longer necessarily available, and we realized that we had a hard time recruiting this expertise. These people were retrained. We had to train new pay employees because we didn't have any at the time. So we had to rebuild this capacity. Thank you.
The opposition side, sorry. And Monsieur Deltel, vous avez 7 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to the House of Commons, ladies and gentlemen.
We all have to make decisions in our life, in our political life, and we all have to make sometimes mistakes. But the most important thing is to have the facts and to rely on those facts and to be sure that those facts are correct. Il est clair, Monsieur le Président, que si on prend des décisions sur des éléments...
And sometimes we make decision on poor information, and the decision will also be poor. In your report, Mr. Ferguson, based on what you said in paragraph 7, and I quote, when the Phoenix executives informed the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement that Phoenix would launch, they did not mention significant problems that they knew about. If I remember correctly in your report, you talked about 3 particular executives who were in charge of Phoenix. Is that correct? Yes. These key management members were from PSPC or from another department? They were from PSPC, yes. From Public Services and Procurement Canada. Yes, they report to the Deputy Minister of PSPC, correctly? Correct? Yes, 2 of them were reporting to the Deputy Minister directly, 2 of the 3. So 2 out of the 3 report to PSPC and report to the Deputy Minister, Ms. Lemay. 2 of the 3 were employees of the department. I think you asked if these senior management members reported directly to the Deputy Minister.
From the department?
Les 3 sont les employés du ministère.
All 3 were department employees, yes. So I'll ask my question to Ms. Lemay because it's your responsibility, because they reported to you. And I'd like to remind you that you, of course, you were not, well, in passing, Chair, there's nothing personal in my questions here. I just want to know what happened and what went wrong. And I'd like to say right away, the names of these 3 people, I'm not really interested in them. I want to know what they did, what they could do, and what they are doing. So these 3 people, are they still working for the Government of Canada? 2 of the 3 people are still employed by us. I'd like to state, Mr. Ferguson was saying that there are 2 senior management members that reported directly to the Deputy Minister, and the 3rd did not report to them directly, but they did work for PSPC. 2 of the 3 are still government employees? Yes. And the 3rd is no longer employed by the Government of Canada. Why? Answer, they retired. Okay. What are they doing, these 2 people who are still under our employ? They work for our department still. What are they doing? As I say, Chair, I'm just repeating what I said earlier. I'm not interested in the personal names. I just want to know what they've done, what they're doing, and what they could do in the future. That's what we're trying to understand, because it's very serious. I'm just to remind you of what Mr. Ferguson said, not me. They didn't mention significant problems that they knew about, and all of this is a result of that. I'm going to answer your question, but I want you to understand. The senior management members, 2 of the 3 that reported to the Deputy Minister, of course they made mistakes, it's clear. The AG identified it, but they also said there were governance and oversight errors that were made. To target these 2 or 3 people, it could take away from other issues and lessons we've learned. So to answer your question, yes, they're still within our department. I don't want to identify their position because you'll find out who they are, but I could give you their position by written. Yes, I want to know they're still within the Canadian government. As a taxpayer and a representative of the citizens, this concerns me. Your argument that the priority was given to costs and timelines, what link does this have to the fact that they didn't mention the significant problems that they knew about? They knew this was a serious issue, and they didn't say it. So what's the link between this and the fact that you're focusing on costs and timelines? I didn't have the same information as Mr. Ferguson on this, but these people were evaluated. They didn't have any ill intention. They didn't do it intentionally to make the system malfunction, but they were evaluated, these people, and they faced consequences. What were they? Answer. They did not have performance, I'm trying to find the word in French, a pay performance bonus that year, or an increase, rather. Often there's more than one project that we evaluate. But they did not have this. They were also no longer working for the pay section. That's it. Wow. So they did change departments. They kept the same salary, the same tax benefits, the same retirement. Is that it? Not necessarily. You said earlier something relatively serious, Ms. Lemay. You said, I don't agree with the conclusion of Mr. No, that's not what I said. Sorry. You said you did not agree. I said I didn't necessarily have the same information. The information that Mr. Ferguson provided, I didn't have it. That's not what the employee said to my predecessor. Ms. Lemay, this is the heart of the problem, the crux of the issue. The final decision was made with false information. There are 3 people who are responsible, and they did not give the correct information that they knew about. That's what Mr. Ferguson says in his report. Do you agree with that or not? Answer. I can't not disagree with it. I wasn't there. I wasn't at the office at the time. I did not have that information at the time. It's not the same thing. The 2 of these 3 people who are still report to you, well, do they agree? They do not agree. We should hear from them then.
Mr. Dattel. Mr. Christopherson, please. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And my apologies to you and colleagues. I think it was mentioned I was in the House for the tribute to my former leader, and as one of his former deputies, I definitely wanted to be there. I hope you understand. This is like one of those times when after 14 years, you're still like, really? How can this be? When you read this report. And I do recognize, Chair, and I'm going to do my best to keep separate the issue of the one-off here versus the broader cultural issues that we'll pick up on Tuesday. There might be some overlap, but my intent will be as much as possible to stay focused on this report. However, having said that, you still can't escape certain words that have been used. And I've been around long enough in the public accounts business and done enough international public accounts business to know that when an Auditor General of the rank and status in the world that our Auditor General has, Mr. Ferguson, when he uses words like, quote, an incomprehensible failure, in that world, that's about as close to swearing as you can get. And so I would like to just ask Mr. Ferguson, and the other 2 reps can get ready because I'm coming to them next, but that's a huge statement. And the last time I saw anything that wide in its scope and scathing was, quite frankly, the sponsorship scandal, where virtually every rule that was there was broken. You really have to go back that far to find something that is this big in its breathtaking failure. So, Mr. Ferguson, incomprehensible failure. Obviously speaking to a lot of the checks and balances that didn't work, because we've heard there's robust systems in place and checks and balances. So I just want to give you an opportunity for my opening remarks to just put a little bit more flesh on the term, an incomprehensible failure. Why the word incomprehensible, sir?
So, as I explained earlier, you can go through all of the different decision points and the steps, and it is comprehensible to understand those decision points and when different decisions should have been made to correct the problem. What's incomprehensible is, as you said, how did nobody say this is not going to work? How did nobody say this needs to be delayed, it needs to be stopped? Why was it all of the checks and balances that have built up over the years, many probably coming out of Auditor General report recommendations to put more checks and balances in place? Why is it that those checks and balances were not sufficient to be able to stop Phoenix? To me, that is what is incomprehensible.
Thank you. And so to the Secretary and the Deputy, help me understand how you presided over something that could be such an incomprehensible failure. How did virtually all the checks and balances fail?
So first of all, neither of us presided over that because we were not there, but I will tell you the lesson for me in this, and that's what we have put forward. It became, when you look at it, I think it's very clear that, as I said, we do manage a lot of projects, and we have rules and we have playbooks for projects. But this is a enterprise-wide IT implementation, a transformation, and clearly we didn't have, in my opinion, the proper playbook and the proper gating. And now what we're doing at PSPC, when we have big projects like that, we look at the project and we ask ourselves, is this one of the projects that is one that can go through with the process that or is this one that needs to have a different way? Do we need to have a different approach on governance? Not every project needs deputy level involvement, for example. Is this project an enterprise-wide needs an attention at a different level? What kind of oversight do we need when it's an enterprise? So we are developing that. It is a big lesson learned. And in my opinion, that's part of the reason, one of the points why that was missed.
Thank
so
you.
We will develop that.
Thank you. That's not very satisfactory, I'm afraid. Go ahead, Mr. Wallace, your best shot.
So I do want to pick up and echo the language in terms of the respect for the AG, and I do want to emphasize that this is an incredibly important set of findings that we take extraordinarily seriously. The reality is that information technology projects are high risk, and many of them do fail. The literature is pretty clear that it's a very, very high percentage that fail. The challenge is not in failure. The challenge is in catastrophic failure. And we understand that the path to that catastrophic failure was long and complex, and the corrections will be long and complex. We have, of course, put in a large number of additional steps, enterprise gating, a variety of other things. We can go through them, but they are just simply additional steps. And as the Auditor General correctly points out, if those controls failed, we need to understand what would actually happen with additional controls. And we are, in fact, undertaking a very serious conversation internally as well about something kind of fundamental. And the Auditor General has used this language as well, but the controls and processes we put in place can not only be followed in form, they need to be followed in substance as well. And that is a rich, incredibly appropriate and necessary dialogue, and we are engaged in that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your brevity. And I hear you, and I've been involved in IT implementation like from the beginning when I was back on City Council in the 80s as these things come in. I understand how complex they are, but that's not going to cut it. That's not going to cut it. I want to refer you to page 10 of the Auditor General's report, where they're talking about the human rights that staff have to have their personal information taken care of. That's got nothing to do with IT alone. That's got to do with whether or not you consider, as a government, on the bureaucratic side, personal information. I mean, take a look at what was said here. Quote, the department did not complete a final privacy impact assessment before implementing Phoenix. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada has reported numerous privacy breaches of federal employees' information in Phoenix after it was put in place, end quote. That's got nothing to do with IT. That's not taking seriously the privacy rights of the people that work for this government. So give me a better answer than just saying IT is difficult.
So, and I'd like to answer this carefully and respectfully, because in no part of my answer am I trying to minimize the depth. Privacy rights, impact on taxpayers, impact on employees, loss of value for the Government of Canada. Fully accept that and deeply, deeply concerned about that. There are incredibly important lessons to be learned from this. They are lessons that are technical in terms of the way we establish governance, but they are also lessons that relate to how we run the system, including the culture. We understand and accept that. We are undertaking the dialogue to ensure that this fundamental notion, and I will echo your language around respect. I will echo the Auditor General's language around substance and not just form. I will echo some other language that it's not tunnel vision, that we actually walk the talk and do the job. Absolutely, completely essential that we do those. We stand accountable for those errors. I will work as hard as I possibly can to make sure that those elements do not happen again. With respect, and to be very clear, there will always be risks. The challenge is not whether it's IT or other things. The challenge is not that projects are difficult. The challenge is when we do not act appropriately, we do not find the ways of addressing those challenges, and we make the fundamental errors. We have made them. We will learn from that.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. We'll now move back to Mr. Lefebvre, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. Madame Lemay, j'aimerais premièrement...
Ms. Lemay, I'd like to thank you first for your report and for the indications of what's coming up with the system and for the measures you've taken. Mr. Ferguson, you heard what Ms. Lemay said with the measures they've taken to make sure that the system will be fixed. Do you think they're on the right track? It's difficult, once again, to say. We did not do an audit on this. We haven't done any work on their file since we did the last audit. But they have made progress. It's very important that the department can explain this progress properly and make sure they have the right information to describe the progress they've made. Thank you.
You know, in your report, you say, how did we get here? And now we're asking, how do we make sure that this never happens again? So I think Ms. Lemay, in her opening statement, showed that she's on, the department, it's on its direction anyways, to put in measures to make sure that this doesn't happen again. It'll be to, obviously, history to judge that and to us to make sure that this doesn't happen again as well. But one of the questions that we're always asking is, how did this happen? And Madame Lemay mentioned in her opening statement your conclusion that Madame Lemay, costs and timelines were prioritized and constrained the outcomes of this project. So costs and timelines were prioritized. In this context, poor decisions were made. And Mr. Ferguson, in your opening remarks, you say the decisions by PSPC to remove critical pay functions, curtail system tests, and forego a pilot implementation of the system obviously led to this failure of the opening of this project. So on the one hand, we have Madame Lemay saying the costs and the timelines were why the PSPC decided to remove critical pay functions, curtail systems, tests, and forego a pilot implementation of the system. Do you agree with that, Madame Lemay?
Yes, if you're
Yes,
reading
you agree with
that.
that. Do you also agree with that, Mr. Ferguson?
Certainly, we said that that the people responsible put the emphasis on delivering the project within time and on budget.
Okay. Now, who determines the timelines and the costs of these projects? Madame Lemay?
In terms of the timeline, the part that was driving most of the timeline was the fact that the compensation advisors had were being let go. So
And when,
there was
and when had they been let go?
I believe it was 2014 when the letters around that. I could give you the proper dates. There were 3 waves, but it was around that date that the letters were sent out.
You did not have the human resource at the time to continue in that with the old program.
Correct, and the cost is established to a process that when you go to Treasury Board and you get approval, then you have your authorities to work within those envelopes to deliver a project.
So, sorry, you just said that basically you have to go to the Treasury Board to ask for more money if you believe. Do you recall if the minister went to Treasury Board to ask for more money, because obviously the costs and timelines were not sufficient for the project?
So again, I wasn't there, but I do know that there was, no, the decision was made to work within the budget and not to go ask for.
So because we worked within the budget, Mr. Ferguson, do you agree that they decided at that point to curtail the system tests, remove the critical pay functions, and forego a pilot implementation of the system because they didn't have the means to do it?
So they made those decisions, and as we explain in the report,
Yes.
they had an original IT budget of $155 million. When they went to IBM to say, this is what we want the system to do, IBM said that will cost $274 million. So that's the point in time that the project executives decided to reduce the functionality in the system, not do the pilot project and those types of things at that point in time.
And again, who decides on the budget? I just want to make sure that I fully understand that.
Well, the budget would be, again, approved by Treasury Board when the project was approved. To me, though, the fundamental issue in here was the department, in my estimation, had a responsibility to go back to Treasury Board to either ask for more money or to tell Treasury Board that the project would not deliver the $70 million a year in savings that it had originally been predicted that it would produce. So one way or another, they should have gone back to Treasury Board.
Fine. Now, when we talk about Treasury Board, just for the Canadian population out there, like when I hear that, I just have it's the bureaucrats that need to go to Treasury Board and ask for more money. But that's from what I've learned, and the clerk of the Privy Council told us that no. He said the minister is the one responsible for asking more money to Treasury Board, not the deputy ministers. Is that correct, Madame Lemay? Sorry?
That is correct.
That is correct. So the minister is the one that is responsible to go ask for more money at Treasury Board, not the deputy ministers. Sorry, I know I'm making you repeat because it's unclear. I just want to make sure.
So the request is made by the minister to the ministers of Treasury Board. But my colleague being at Treasury Board might be able to give you more on the process.
So the budget was never increased to make sure that, and so it was curtailed. All the tests and the checks and balances that you, Mr. Ferguson, have stated that needs to be put in to make sure that a project is successful. They didn't do it because obviously, from what I can hear, when we can conclude, they didn't have the budget to do this, and they never went back to ask for more money to the Treasury Board to make sure that these measures were all put in place. Is that correct, Mr. Ferguson?
So again, yes, they decided to cut back on the functionality, and as the project progressed, it became more and more evident the importance of those functions that they decided to cut back, and they should have been able to realize that by cutting out things like being able to pay people retroactively, it was going to have a significant effect on the performance of the system.
My last point. Thank you. You mentioned that obviously the payroll specialist had been let go. Now, in February of 2016, again, the clerk of the Privy Council kind of alluded to this, saying, listen, there was when the decision was made to go forward with Phoenix, there was no system to go back to because obviously it was a manual system. They were doing it manually, and there was no more human resources to put in the information manually. Is that the case, Madame Lemay?
Well, it was a very old system. The Auditor General had raised issues with the system that was there. There was a lot of manual process, correct? So yes, when the rollout started, it was rolling to the new system, no system. The only system that was there was for the data, some data, but not for the transaction and the process.
Thank you, Mr. Lefebvre. We'll now move to Mr. McCauley, please.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. Gavin Liddy in this very room, July 2 years ago, testified with Phoenix that they delayed laying off because they knew the system wasn't ready. Is there a reason why we couldn't have extended that even more?
Well, if you remember, it was originally going to be September and November, then it went to February and April, right. April being a pretty significant month in the world of government, so it was the end of fiscal year. Any extension would have required departments to go back and ask for money for the following year because they would all needed to rehire right. people.
But Mr. Liddy testified, yeah, we delayed the layoffs because we knew it wasn't ready in September, October, yeah. And then he later testified that these people were still around. Why? The question came up is why we couldn't run two similar systems, and he testified, well, people had transferred over to Miramichi, and the other people were getting ready to transfer, but we're still there. We knew the warning signs were out because we saw the Gartner report was published, all the other things were coming forward. Was there a reason why we just couldn't delay further as had been done before?
Yes. So the first delay
And just briefly,
was
because I got
based.
a bunch of other questions.
So the
sorry.
first delay was based on recommendation, discussion with IBM, others, the departments, and there was a window to be able to delay to February and April. When my understanding is when the decision was made not to launch in February, there was discussions with IBM. They agreed with the workarounds that were proposed.
So
and the
delaying the layoffs was the right thing to do in September.
And the
we
layoffs
probably
could not
have
be.
done again.
The people were. End of April was a significant date because there was no more money in departments to retain these people.
However, if you read the testimony, you'll see that several departments, Health Canada and several others, actually kept some of them kept their full complement of staff to address some of the worries of Phoenix that had been identified, such as people who do the long shifts and the 5 on, 5 off.
Yes.
So according to Mr. Leedy, it could have been possible. Let me just move on quickly to your departmental plan. And I want to get to your action plan as well. You've got your departmental plan shows 95% of delivery of paychecks correctly on time. We heard before that's an aspirational target, not a real target, and I understand that. What is our real target on delivering these services to our public employees for this year, and what are we at right now? Last year we were at 36% for the year. What are we currently at for success, and what realistically can we get to?
Okay, maybe I'll ask Mr. Linklater to answer that one.
From the departmental report, we do have service standards across the board in terms of our services. We do feel that we owe it to employees to be able to.
What are we at now for delivering? What can we realistically get to? Because we know the number, we've been told the number in your departmental plan
Right.
is not an accurate, realistic number. What can we get to?
With our last public dashboard, which was posted a week or so ago, we were meeting service standards 60% of the time.
That's a good jump from last year then.
Yes.
What do we hope to get to, seeing that we've gone from 36 to 60? What do we hope to get to by end of year?
I would like to see continuous improvement in this space.
We all would. What will we get to? What's realistic?
I think it's realistic to assume that we should probably maintain 60, if not improve.
So we went from 36 to 60, but we don't see any more improvement, even with the pay
I would hope
pots
that
and
there
all the
will be
great
more
plans?
improvement, Mr. Chair, given the number of initiatives that are underway, but it would be impossible for me to quantify that today.
Fair enough. The 300 million, 307 million in the stabilization plan for Phoenix, stabilization future transformation, can you give us the breakdowns what that money is going to be used for? How much of it is going to be used just to maintain 60%? How much is for other projects within that place?
A significant portion of the funding that we have this year is to maintain and to increase our staff augmentation.
Specifically this 307 million that's in the estimates.
Yes,
please.
so particularly for the HR capacity that we continue to grow. We also have expenses for technology, including for the vendor, IBM. And
How much
we're also,
for IBM?
I beg your pardon?
How much for IBM?
I don't have the specifics with me, but we can provide them to the clerk in writing.
Ms. LeMay? Do you know
I don't have it with me. I'm sorry.
how much time? One of those items. Clear up something. An access information came back from your department clearly identifying not clearing the backlog as the main problem with Phoenix. And then there's other testimony that we've got that says the slow transformation, the difficulty in tackling the new software, actually we underestimated. So your own department and the Vice Minister said, blame not clearing the backlog, but we're hearing all these other issues from Mr. Ferguson and yourselves. How, I guess there's a lack of public trust as identified by Mr. Ferguson. How can we really have a sense of trust when items that we've accessed on our access information say one thing from your department, but then publicly we're hearing other things?
So I think that one thing that's absolutely clear is there's not one single thing that made this thing go wrong. I mean, there's a number of elements. That's why I keep talking about the multiple points of failure.
The access to information identified that as that and one other as the main things.
You're
saying...
Thanks, Mr. McCauley. We'll come back to you.
Sure.
We'll now move to Mr. Chen, I believe. Mr. Chen, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to acknowledge. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to acknowledge that it is National Public Service Week, and it is a time for all Canadians to express their thanks for the hard work of our public servants. As Ms. LeMay alluded to, there is great work being done, such as pension modernization and a long-term plan for our parliamentary precinct, all within Public Services and Procurement Canada, which of course, takes me now to Phoenix. I agree that Phoenix was a complex undertaking from the start, as has been pointed out today, 40-year-old legacy system, 290,000 federal employees, 101 departments and agencies, all with different pay systems and functions, and getting them together on one new system is a tremendous undertaking. But to me, it seems that basic project management best practices were simply ignored. 4 officials, including the project director and 3 executives from PSPC, as Mr. Deltel had inquired about, were in charge of the Phoenix project. And the Auditor General, in his report, paragraph 1.32, wrote that Phoenix executives scaled back the project's functions to save money or time. In the spring of 2012, after the planning phase of Phoenix, IBM told Public Services and Procurement Canada that Phoenix would cost $274 million to build and implement. The Treasury Board had approved a Phoenix building and implementation budget of $155 million in 2009. PSPC did not consider asking the Treasury Board for more money to build and implement Phoenix. Instead, Phoenix executives decided to work with IBM to find ways to reduce the scope of work to fit the approved budget. So my question is this: how could that have happened? How could a team of 4 people, without considering the vast array of functionality that was required, set out through the various departments who were going to be using this new system, in the presence of IBM, who was there to customize and build the software to specific project requirements, PeopleSoft, who had developed the software platform to process the pay that was going to be customized by IBM, with the people involved at the table, somebody must have said, this system is not being tested properly. This system will not work because functionality is being removed, and the entire purpose of standardizing and bringing forward a new modernized system of pay is to ensure that it provides the functionality that is needed. So how could this have happened? How did that team of 4 people make that decision without anyone noticing?
So I will point to a couple of other points of failure, I believe. One of the things that I think really missed is that there was no holistic view of this implementation from one end to the other, including the HR processes and the whole thing. So when decisions were made, they felt that they had the appropriate workaround, but always looked into in more of a, I'll say so, this is my assessment of, I'm trying to help you understand this because that's what I understand from it and my assessment of it. So that holistic view was not there. They did do these workarounds and they mitigated in their mind with risk, but risks were not looked at cumulatively and holistically. Another example is you have departments that did not let go their compensation advisors. And if you look at today, those departments are doing much better than the ones that lost their compensation advisors. In fact, 20% of their transactions our queue is about 20% over 30 days, whereas the other departments were at like 70%. So it's a combination of a number of things that really landed to this, to use the words of the clerk, this perfect storm of this failure.
So I'm trying to understand if it's incompetence or bad planning and a lack of proper judgment, because if there were risks and those risks were mitigated, when you reduce or remove functionality from a new system that is supposed to be mirroring requirements that have been met through the various legacy systems that were in place in the departments, what was the plan? How were you going to restore those functionalities? Were they taken offline? Was there a contingency plan to address that functionality that was removed?
So obviously the decision in hindsight was not the right one, but there were mitigation measures. These retroactive of acting, for example, were implemented later. But all of this, they weren't the right decisions, clearly. But again, when you say like, how did they make these decisions? The only thing I can see is because everybody was looking at this in isolation and not at the end-to-end of this. So there was no global
Mr.
oversight.
Chen, sorry. Thank you. You're already way over. We'll now move back to Mr. Deltel, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. So I want to get back to the conversation that we had earlier with Madame Lemay. Madame Lemay, ma question était de savoir.
Ms. Lemay, I'd like to know, you said that these three peoples didn't have the same vision as Mr. Ferguson. Can you tell us more about that? When you talk about human resources, some of it's private. But what I had to do was to evaluate these individuals. We waited for the evaluation to see the first report from the Auditor General. I did an evaluation with the information I was given, and the result was that they did not deserve to receive their performance increase, and they were moved elsewhere. I should have specified my question. It's not whether they deserved their bonus or not, the answer was clear, but how come what Mr. Ferguson describes in his report, that these three people did not mention the serious issues that they knew about? Are these three individuals, do they agree with Mr. Ferguson, who says that these three people knew things but they didn't say them? Do they agree with this statement or not? What I know, from what I know, I don't believe they would agree. But you'd have to ask Mr. Ferguson. I didn't have this conversation with him. Thank you, Ms. Lemay. You took the words out of my mouth. Mr. Ferguson, the situation's quite important. Did you speak to these three individuals? Do you have any documents to show that they hid the information? Of course, we spoke with these three individuals. We asked them questions about each of the decisions they made. We also examined the documentation and the information that was discussed with the Deputy Minister. I'll ask Mr. Goulet about this, if there's any details he can give about each of these conversations. In the conversations we had with these individuals, they told us fundamentally that they thought the system would be operational when it was implemented. They had a specific vision of how the system was supposed to work, and they believed it fundamentally. I'm not talking about vision here, I'm talking about problems. In your opinion, Mr. Ferguson, you wrote that they didn't mention serious errors, failures that they were aware of. Did they have this information? Did they keep this information about serious issues? Did they keep it, or yes or no? They did not transmit all the information they had. About serious issues that led to this problem? Yes. Answer. Ms. Lemay, you said, that's what I thought. You did not confirm that this was the case, and that's what they thought. Did they believe that they told all the information they had or not? They believe they didn't mislead anyone. In terms of the information, well, there's a lot of information on the project. I don't know what Mr. Goulet believes was essential or important at the time. It wasn't part of their discussions. These people would probably say that they didn't intend to give anyone poor information to wreck the system. In life, you can never lie, but you don't have to always say everything. But did they have serious information that they did not provide? I didn't say this. The AG said it. Is that true or not? I don't know. I wasn't there. So I think the best way to find this out is to bring these three people before the committee so they can give us their version of the story. Do you agree with that? I can't answer that for you. We need to shed light on this key issue. It's an important issue, pivotal issue. I'll remind you what I said earlier. There's nothing personal in all of this, but how can we make the right decisions when we don't have the right information? What I would ask the committee to do well, if we think these 3 people, voluntary or involuntary, led to the situation we have today, which is a catastrophic failure, if these people or 2 people did this, I think that's really simplifying things. This is a complex problem. There are a lot of pressure points.
We'll now go to Mr. Area, please. Mr. Area, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Lemay, I would like to focus on the IBM report, which said that it would take $274 million against the budgeted amount of $155 million. When IBM submitted that report, the executive I think they informed the Deputy Minister, correct?
I'm not certain about
You
that.
didn't check that? Being such a big thing that, a project going ahead with just 55% of the budgeted, expected expenditure, and the executives didn't discuss that with the then Deputy Minister?
So you'll just remember that I was not there. I'm saying
But
that...
didn't you find out whether they discussed that with the Deputy Ministers or not?
I've been so focused on fixing the pay issue since I've arrived. I've just started to be able to look at putting the best practices to make sure that we don't have it. So
okay,
the details about
no, it's not the detail. I'm sorry, it's not mind the detail. If we were to trace back all the problems we have with the Phoenix today, it goes back to this fundamental, basic decision of going ahead with this project with just 55% of the required amount.
So the budget was approved, right?
No, the budget was approved for $155 million.
Mm-hmm.
IBM said $274 million. So these executives, without discussing with the deputy ministers, at least in my view, they can't go ahead.
I don't know what to tell you. Again, I was not there. So the one thing that I can tell you is that IBM agreed to go ahead with this.
The decision was made by whom to proceed with 55% of the required amount?
I would say, at the end of the day, the deputy is accountable under their watch, right? But executives work. So was the decision at that point made by the person, or was it discussed with the deputy? Today, I don't know.
Suppose there's a project today that comes to your table, and the executives come and say, this project requires $274 million, but the budgeted amount is $155 million. Will you, as deputy minister, decide still to go ahead with the project, or will you bring it to the notice of the minister?
So this is a really good question, because I just told you when we started that we manage 430 plus 2,500 projects. So about 3,000 projects that go on at PSPC. They're not all the same, which is what I was saying earlier, is I think what we're missing...
This is not one tiny project.
That's it. So we need to be able at the beginning to say, does this project require special attention from the deputy head level? What is the oversight for these special approaches?
No, I'm sorry.
What's the governance?
That is not the thing I'm asking. I'm asking, if it comes to you today that a project requires $274 million, the budgeted amount is $155 million, will you decide to go ahead with this project without getting the concurrence of the minister?
Well, I don't need the concurrence. I would need to make sure that I inform, to make sure that it's, if I think there's an issue, like I would, we're talking about hypothesis here, but I would definitely...
It's not a hypothesis, it's actually happened. Suppose the same thing comes to you.
So I will answer this differently. I apologize. So if I get that, what I would do in a situation like that, I sit down with the staff and we go through it, and I would need justification, explanation, and if there's a good reason why we should go ahead and I'm comfortable with it, that's how I would brief. So if it's not, if I'm not, I would send them back to the drawing board.
How can one be comfortable going ahead with any project, whether it's IT project or the building project, any project with just 55% of the amount required?
For the same project, no. But if it's okay to split it into, you're asking me a loaded question there. For the same project, no.
I'll come back to you because I got limited time. I want to ask Mr. Goulet, when you talk to the executives, did you ask them that with whom they discussed to go ahead with the project, where they got the approval, or who made the decision to go ahead with the project?
No, this information was ascertained on the basis of the documents that we've got and conversations with a variety of individuals.
No, my question is, did you ask them who made the decision to go?
Area.
So it's 4.5 minutes?
Yeah, I know but you got 5 seconds left, so let him finish his. What's that?
Chairman's prerogative to have?
No. Okay, Mr. Area, finish quickly, please.
Did you ask who made the decision to go ahead with the project implementation with just 55% of the amount required?
We asked one individual, and they basically said that they did.
Thank you. We'll now move to Mr. McCauley.
Right.
Mr. Christopherson, sorry, okay. David.
That's fine. Thanks, Chair. I have 2 areas, Chair. I don't know if I'll have enough time, but I see we have time on the clock. I'm hoping if colleagues will agree, if we have residual questions, we'll use that time to do that. But I only have 2 right now, assuming I get satisfactory answers. First thing I want to do is to point out to colleagues and everyone that this Auditor General is constantly looking at individual reports and trying to extrapolate from that government-wide problems that, if addressed on a government-wide basis, would help us avoid these kind of things. And I'd just like to point out that it wasn't that long ago, colleagues, Mr. Ferguson was here telling us that, in his view, what government needs to do is to, quote, do service well, end quote. And by that he meant measure the impact on the citizens that are affected, and are they getting the service and are they getting the value? In this case, that constituency would be the people who work here. And I just want to point out that the deputy has mentioned a couple of times that one of the things they did wrong was to measure internally how well did we do moving from one desk to another or moving from one step to another, and measuring that and losing sight of the holistic overview. So as we go about looking at the Auditor General's sweeping remarks about overall government, let's understand his track record is pretty good in terms of recognizing areas that are problematic across the board. And this is just a prime example of getting yourself lost in the details and forgetting what it was all about. It was all about making sure that the people that work for this government get paid in a timely fashion and in an accurate fashion. And that got lost. So when we visit the other issue that the Auditor General has raised, when we do that next week, I would hope we keep in mind that his track record on these kind of things is very good. A question I want to come to, and this is, like, I'm just a simple guy from Hamilton. And I have trouble understanding how it is that the departments went ahead without doing the test. The first test. To me, it was like somebody putting on a major play and somebody saying, yeah, dress rehearsal, schmess rehearsal, we don't need to worry about that. Let's just go straight to it. So, speaking from the report, the Auditor General says, and I quote, "We also found that Public Service and Procurement Canada did not test Phoenix as a whole system before implementation and did not know whether it would operate as intended. A pilot would have allowed the department to determine if the system would work in a real setting without affecting pay that was still being processed by the old system. This pilot was the department's chance to test a final live version of Phoenix before implementation." And here's the punchline. "The pilot could have allowed the department to detect problems that would have shown that the system was not ready." Now, it's just a common sense point of view, and I'll start with you, Deputy. How could it be that a test to see if it works was deemed to be something superfluous and could be set aside in whatever other interest, budget or otherwise? How could that final test, as one of the checks and balances, how could that ever, by anybody making responsible decisions, be just brushed away? How can that be, Deputy?
So my understanding is that they had mitigation measures for that too, but clearly it was not a good decision.
I remain underwhelmed, Madame. Mr. Wallace, Treasury Board Secretariat is there to provide sort of the backstop, the overview of what the ministries are doing to make sure that they're adhering to policies. I have to believe at some point it appears on one of your dashboards or checklists or somewhere, did they do an actual test, especially when it's a system? I would imagine Defense does a whole lot of tests before they implement systems. So help me understand how the Treasury Board Secretariat missed this as well.
So to go back to your early analogy, they actually edited the play first. And I think we do need to understand the depth of the dysfunction and challenge associated with that. You are absolutely right. The Treasury Board does have a challenge function and does have an oversight function, and the Auditor General is absolutely correct that was followed in form rather than substance. And the reality is that the boxes were checked, but the values were not lived. And, you know, the reality is that we work with human beings, and the reality is that we need to be absolutely on top of that. So the lessons learned here are not only about additional steps, barriers, layers, reporting requirements, all of those things like that. They are fundamentally about the way we work as a system, the relationship of Treasury Board, and making sure that we actually ensure that at the start of projects, in the middle, through the green lighting, through the stage gates, that the elements that are put in there appropriately, the values are actually lived.
Thank you, Mr. Walz. Every once in a while, we just get a few questions from the table as we write this report, but we've kind of used the dress rehearsal analogy here. I guess one of the reasons, is it possible, Ms. LeMay, that if it's so obvious that it isn't ready to go, that maybe there's no use having a dress rehearsal if it isn't quite, you know, if it's obvious to everyone that it's not ready to go? Is that a possibility? If they postpone a pilot project, it doesn't mean they've completely canceled a pilot project. If they've postponed a pilot project, is that a reason for, you know, we wouldn't assume that there would never be a pilot project, but canceling that pilot project in June of 15, there may have been a number of reasons, one being that they knew it wasn't ready to go with the pilot project.
With the pilot project, I'm assuming that or the time, like it's one or the other, right? And doing the pilot project, because my understanding is that doing the pilot project plus the other things, there was a time constraint. Again, we go back to the launch with the compensation advisors that were leaving, so that was part of the time frame that they were looking at. My understanding too is they had these conversations with IBM and others about how to go about this, and that was the decision that was made.
I see that you came into your position. Exactly when was that? The 11th of April. 11th of April. Yeah. When you came into that position, were you given a transition binder? Did you have a new transition binder that they give to most deputy ministers or ministers?
I did.
Did the briefing binder contain the Gartner report?
Not to my recollection. We didn't even have the Gartner report until I found out about it when we were here, I think, at the committee. But the binder is really, really big. I'd have to go back. That's my recollection, is the Gardner report was not in there. I could confirm that if you want.
So when did the government order the Gardner report?
So it was the Treasury Board that ordered the Gardner report. I believe it was January or December, or was before Christmas?
There was a public service management committee meeting during which Phoenix was discussed. Further to that discussion, the former Secretary of the Treasury Board hired them, and that report was provided to them in January of 2016.
So
board to the Treasury Board, but it was communicated to PSPC.
So you've ordered a new report. You have a new minister coming in. She's not aware if she had the Gartner report or not. Isn't that odd? I mean, the Gartner report is there to help. Is this ready? Is this ready?
So just
and Gartner said that it may not be ready to launch, right?
Gartner, in fact, did state that.
But yet, we aren't sure if it was in the transition binder but yet the launch took place.
So the transition binder, my transition binder,
Yep.
really, I'm like 99.9% no, because we didn't see this report, but I'd have to go back to be absolutely sure to.
So if a government required or requested report says that there's going to be big problems here, a new minister comes in, gets a briefing, and then moves ahead with a launch.
So we need to get the dates straight here. Like, so if you're talking my transition binder or the minister's transition binder, I came in April. So the Gardner report was something that was Treasury Board command. PSPC did their own report through the gating processes. That's the SI report you heard about. That report did say that considering everything, it was ready to go. Treasury Board decided to order a specific report, the Gardner report. I'm not sure what was the genesis of this, but it was probably because there was probably some reason to do it. They did that. It was delivered to Treasury Board. It was shared with PSPC. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was January. I'd have to go back to that date. So January 29th. We're also communicated with by the Controller General to the Associate Deputy at PSPC.
Thank you. Ms.
Point of clarification on this, the Gardner report, that yes, at OGO committee it was confirmed that it was given to the minister on the 29th of January and only given to the minister in the summer.
Yeah, that seems odd. Ms. Yip, please, and then Mr. McCauley.
Thank you for coming. Ms. Lemay, in your opening statement, it is mentioned that there are multiple points of failure. Do you think that part of changing the workplace culture would be to have consequences for poor performance in the public service? What about, aside from the 3 executives, what about others who were responsible at other levels? There must be some sort of accountability and consequence. What can be done better in the future?
That's a very good question. Again, I think to be able to really assess, when you assess the different executives, we do have a system to manage performance, and maybe I can let my colleagues speak to the system. We have the tools that we have. Now, one of the things, again, I go back, and it's going to sound like I'm going back to the same thing, but part of our action plan is to look at what do we do for the enterprise-wide projects. And to me, there should be clear accountability and authority for an enterprise-wide project that might be different than from a project that is a PSPC project, for example. So setting those roles, responsibilities, accountabilities, and authorities right in the beginning, you're able to then keep people very accountable for what they do or don't do. So that clarity, we have a system where when everything goes well, it's fine, but when things don't go well, so we have to really make sure that we get those roles, responsibility, clarity, oversight at the beginning. Spending that time will pay at the end, and will be able for us to really do a good job at managing that.
I appreciate the question around accountability, and I do think it is an important and fundamental spot, and I'll answer it going forward on a going forward basis if I may. But I think that there may well be opportunities to improve the accountability regime of the Government of Canada on a going forward basis. One of them is to actually look at the number of layers of executives and whether or not that number of layers actually facilitates the effective flow of information. Secondly, and perhaps fundamentally, we do need to look at the capacity of the Government of Canada for removals, and the barriers for cause right now are very, very high. It may be appropriate to look at legislative change to facilitate more rapid removals of executives who have failed to perform. There also may be an opportunity to look at the potential to recover any performance pay or in particular pay at risk that may have been granted in error. In other words, if a department knew later what it just knew at the time, if gross mismanagement or other very serious discrepancies are discovered, and after a due process it may be appropriate to recover those. The government has put those in place for governor and council appointments on a going forward basis, and they may well be applicable to the public service as well. I think that's an important dialogue, because I think this does raise fundamental issues of accountability around information flow and consequence.
Thank you. I'm just so disappointed that there doesn't seem to be any accountability. It just seems like people are just shuffled. My next question is for Mr. Ferguson. In your statement, you mentioned an underappreciation of the seriousness of the problem. How can we change this type of thinking or culture?
Well, so there are, again, I think two aspects to it. There's the, as you mentioned in your question, there's the culture aspect, but then there's also, the procedural aspect. And I think the underappreciation of the problems got through too many people, partly because there was not the oversight built into the project. All of the decisions, all of the information went through the executives who were responsible for that project. So as soon as they did not appreciate the seriousness and the accumulation of the risks, as soon as they did not appreciate that, there was no other mechanism for anybody else within the project hierarchy to identify that problem. So I think there's the structure, and the deputy has talked about the need for there to be appropriate governance structures in these complex multi-departmental projects to make sure that there are other ways of identifying when that happens. But then there's also the cultural side of it. And I think the cultural side of it, again, was, in this case, was there were many people outside of the decision process, the decision hierarchy, the formal decision hierarchy in this project. There were many people who became aware of the significance of the problems, but they didn't find a way of stepping in and slowing down or changing the project. So there needs to be the formal ways of doing it, but then there also needs to be informal ways as well. If people outside of the project are seeing something that is not working well, there need to be informal ways for those people to speak up as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson and Ms. Yip. Mr. McCauley, please.
Great. I wonder, Ms. LeMay, briefly, your PSPC Management Action Plan from the fall 2017, there's about 3 or 4 items there that are due now. Have you met those goals?
Yes, we'll take that.
Some are due April 2018, early 2018. Are we up to date on those goals?
If I could, yes, we are. We have completed the root cause analysis. We did post in the fall a number
Sorry,
of...
I'm just going to interrupt short time. Yeah. Are there any outstanding that are from the due dates of, say, April or early 2018, or we're on track?
No, they are, where they're marked ongoing, they are still ongoing.
Okay. Ms. LeMay, you actually yourself testified that IBM delayed the original testing to allow for further testing and ensure further due diligence. IBM testified in the Senate, yes, we delayed it because the system wasn't ready. And then we end up with, following up Mr. Sorensen, we end up with the Gartner report, which is very, very clearly saying it's not ready. We've had, there was a meeting of all the Director Generals of HR saying it's not ready. We had the the CFOs all stating all the problems that we knew from the testing, not ready. And this, was coming out before you were here. I'll admit that. And I guess we should probably maybe give you a DeLorean and Doc Brown to send you back in the future to answer some of the questions, because we keep asking about stuff when you weren't here. But what do we put in place to ensure we don't have another situation like this where, 2015, we knew summer 2015, the red flags were recognized that it's not ready, so IBM delayed their testing. The rollout was delayed, so we knew back then that it wasn't ready. And all of a sudden we get into change in government, change in people. All these warning signs were there. We all knew. And yet the minister wasn't briefed, apparently. And we heard in testimony that PSPC got Gartner well in time, but apparently never passed on to the minister. Like, what have we done to change that? But also, how does the minister at the time, and I know they've changed, not know everything because that's going on with this? Because it's all the signs were there. We all knew.
So just on that one, we testified here before. I've said that before. There was one briefing made on February 18 to the minister from what we gathered in terms of the documents, and you could see the documents. It was ready to go. She was not asked for. So that's, and I think we can make that document available for you. But your point about knowing different groups bringing issues and those issues not somehow being heard is a very important one. And I think that's what, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the Auditor General is referring to in terms of, so what are we doing about it?
And very briefly, because I have a couple other questions.
Again, the way we set up big projects, making sure that there's independent advice directly to the DM. In my case, any big project I'll set up, I'll have a direct advice. Not all the governance going through the same process, and making sure that if it's an enterprise-wide, at the beginning, there's a proper oversight and governance set up with roles and responsibility where people can bring those issues and they can have different channels.
Let me ask you, you've obviously read Mr. Ferguson's report. You agree with it? His findings? And the reason, I don't want to put you on the spot, or Mr. Ferguson or Mr. Wernick, but we heard very different testimony the other day about the seriousness of the culture that allows something like this to happen.
So I agree with the recommendation, and we're acting on the recommendation. I told you also about the culture. I mean, I do agree with the clerk. We do have a world-class public service, and this doesn't mean that we have a broken public service. But I did also tell you about some of the things that we're doing at PSPC. I think we do need to really work hard to create a culture where it's safe to bring issues, and we have to have different mechanisms for that. We have to be able to create the environment, but we have to have the different processes, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. Different people need different ways to bring issues up, and it's going to be a constant reminder. You can't just say it and walk away. You have to walk the talk, and it has to be sustained.
Mr. Ferguson, in light of the comments that were made by Mr. Wernick, how do we get to some of these cultural issues that you've warned us about, whether it's in Indigenous services or a Phoenix type thing, where you've painted a very clear picture, a very scary picture, and we've heard testimony that some of these issues exist, but then we have maybe someone from a different part saying, well, it's not as bad as that. And we've got credible public service who recognize that, but we do have an issue, and it almost feels that your report's going to reject it.
Well, the message that I delivered was about the necessity to look to the culture and what needs to be changed and affected in the culture. I think we've heard from the Deputy Minister today that they are doing some things within that department to try and identify where there could have been some cultural factors. I think we've heard from the Secretary as well the need for departments to follow policies, the substance of the policies, not just the checkbox. So for me, what's important is that that dialogue starts, and that each institution within the government starts to look at what are the cultural aspects. Are there cultural things within their environment that could be getting in their way?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Mr. Sampson, welcome to our committee, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm filling in for someone today, so I'm not aware of the same context as everyone else, but I'd like to focus on two things. What was happened in the beginning, and then what's happened now, what's happening on the ground. So for me, the problem seems clear. The funding requested for the project, well, we asked how much it would cost. They received only 50% of the budget. So we cut out functions and the pilot project. I've worked on IT systems in Nova Scotia. I have many years of experience in this field, and I can tell you, if I know that the project that I'm planning and proposing won't be presented as such, that's the problem. You have to have a strong foundation for your project. So I'm surprised and shocked that we were able to determine that everything was okay, that we won't do the project as planned. We'll cut off a few pieces. that's a whole other kettle of fish. Based on my experience, as 30 years experience as an administrator, people under that DM can't make the decision by themselves. They have to go up to the minister to do it. If the deputy minister has to say what the problem is, and the decision is made accordingly. But it's really incredible that that happened today. If a major project was underway and your employees didn't tell you about the issues, you'd have a big problem. That's one thing. Second, you mentioned change, 3 levels of change in terms of practices, the culture, and the transformation. Can you give us some examples? Something you've done right now? Something that would give us confidence in the future that things will go better. Something in terms of practice, culture, and transformation. 3 examples, please. We have already implemented lessons we've learned from all this. As public servants, we have a role, and as deputy minister, I have a role in terms of, well, if we think we need a certain amount of investment for a project, we have to defend our point of view. And I think Phoenix will serve as a lesson in the future. And if we don't learn from Phoenix, we've learned nothing. At PSPC, we're already implementing lessons learned. We're looking at investments and not trimming projects. We've already done this. In terms of the transformation, as I said earlier, we're looking at our organization, the way we work, the way we serve, and we're transforming our culture. We have to create an environment where people feel they have permission to bring forward issues. And, well, let's look at a scenario. Imagine tomorrow morning, people come to you and they say, we don't have enough money for the project, it won't work. Would you go see the minister about this? What would the next step be for you if you're advised that this project won't work? What I would do, I would say, we don't have a choice, we can't do the project. Either we get the funding or, well, we won't risk the organization. If we can't do the project, we won't do it. Would you not go to the minister? If we need more money, yes, I would have to. If we need more funding, we'll have to go see the minister. The minister would go to the Treasury Board then. Did the minister, was he informed that he should go to the Treasury Board and he didn't do it? Mr. Wallace? No.
Please. Thank you, Chair. With your indulgence, I do want to make a brief reference to the message that we'll deal with on Tuesday, but it's where it's very specific to Phoenix to keep us focused, if you'll allow me, sir. One of the key things in public life these days, and we're all in it to one degree or another, is transparency and accountability. And I know this is not easy for you. It's not supposed to be. Somebody has to be held accountable, unless you think that we get off when you go knocking on thousands of doors and the question on the doorstep is, how'd I do? Let me tell you, you'll learn about transparency and certainly about accountability. One of the things, Chair, and I've mentioned this before, that struck me the hardest, given all my years on this committee, was in that report, the message to us, and it's strictly on Phoenix, but the Auditor General posed the question about who's to blame, and in the context of that said, and I quote, it's a difficult question to answer because it's as if the Phoenix project was set up to avoid responsibility, either by design or by accident. I want to repeat that. Because it's as if the Phoenix project was set up to avoid responsibility, either by design or by accident. So Mr. Ferguson, just if there's anything you want to add to that, because that's pretty damning, especially even the hint that somebody in the bureaucracy deliberately set it up so that it wasn't clear who made the decisions. Accident is a little less so, still hugely problematic. But your thoughts on that, sir? And then, Mr. Wallace, to give you fair notice, I'm going to be coming to you to ask for a commitment about what you're going to do in your challenge function going forward to assure us that this won't happen again. So, Mr. Auditor General.
Well, I think really that statement I think is pretty clear. You know, again, it comes back to we couldn't find things like documentation for who actually said yes, this system is ready to go. Let's you know, let's go live with it. The number of deputy minister changes that happened, right? The deputy minister that was in place when the decision was made, even he had only been in place for a year, a very short period of time. How would he have really understood everything that was going on with this system? There was no oversight. There was no, you know, everything was built going through the project executive. So there was no oversight. There was no clear role of, you know, the deputy minister. Later on, all of a sudden, Treasury Board Secretariat comes in and they do the Gartner report, but they don't actually have any authority within the project. The PSPC or the PSMAC, the group of deputies was brought in at the very end to say, you know, but they didn't have any decision authority as well. So at that decision point, it all seemed to be almost like, you know, they were reaching for different ways, you know, going to PSMAC, Treasury Board Secretariat coming in, producing a Gartner report that essentially got it right, but then that Gartner report goes to the project executives. So the whole design of the project, as I said, did not lead to being able to say, here's who should have been accountable and responsible for this.
And so, Mr. Wallace, I gave you a notice. It wasn't a gotcha question. What I'm seeking from you, sir, is an absolute assurance that in your challenge function going forward, that you won't let this sort of thing happen again.
And let me be very clear, you will never get an absolute assurance from me because life is messy. There are enormous challenges, and I say that not, frankly, to duck accountability, but to indicate to you that we will do everything we can to mitigate risk, but risk is a reality. The challenge here is how we prevent small problems from becoming enormous, incomprehensible problems. So let me go through a number of steps that we have already undertaken, and then we speak to something a little bit more fundamental than that. We have, of course, put in place a stronger role for the Chief Information Officer. We have updated our information technology and management policies. We put in place much stronger governance in terms of deputy ministers' committees with clearer lines of accountabilities. We have ensured that Treasury Board is engaged in a much more meaningful way in two forms of the challenge function, the fiscal challenge function and now a much stronger role for the IT challenge function as well. We have created a number of very important digital standards around interoperability, access to cloud, a whole variety of other things, absolutely critical to avoid these things and allow for broader vendor interface as well. We have put in place an enormous amount of work on project management strategy under the Office of the Controller General, and we have put in place a variety of multi-level governance models associated with all of those things. But to be very clear, those are all hurdles, they're all step points. They could become bureaucratic friction unless we take the core lesson seriously. And the core lesson seriously here is that these things are not there to be maneuvered around. They are there so that we actually understand what we are doing. We take appropriate risk, but not disproportionate risks with taxpayer values, with the privacy of our employees' information, with our fundamental need to pay our employees accurately on time, or any other IT project. We are putting all of those measures in place. They will be very helpful, but what they will require is vigilance all the way through to make sure that those values, that what those policies represent are actually part of the lived experience of the organization. That will never provide you with the absolute assurance that you seek, as you will understand, but it will provide you with, and I hope to provide parliamentarians with an understanding that we are learning these absolutely critical lessons. We take them fantastically seriously. As you are correct, we do not enjoy this experience. We understand the absolute imperative of getting these things right on a going forward basis. I need to add one other piece as well, and I do need to reiterate that accountability is fundamental, and it is our belief that we can increase and augment the accountability regimes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. We'll now move to Mr. McCauley, please.
Great. Ms. LeMay, I realize you got there just before rollout number 2. Was there a sign-off or go-ahead required for the second phase?
No, well, I wasn't asked for any. No, it was actually it was a default. The way it was set up is that the go live was in February, and the wave 2 was happening unless there was a catastrophic failure. I think that's what it was called.
Otherwise, we just didn't know about it.
And you have to know too that the dates of the phase, there was blackout periods before the dates. So actually, when we talk about February 24th. The data transfer actually started before, same thing to April. When I walked in, the blackout period was already there. So it wouldn't have been asked anyway.
To the Treasury Board, you commissioned the Gartner because word had got up, obviously, through various departments that there was an issue. Where specifically, it's a very damning report. Like, no one can read the Gartner report and have any other conclusion than, oh my God, the Titanic is heading for an iceberg. Why would Treasury Board just put it in an inter-office envelope and send it to some lower-level ADMs? Why would it have not gone to the DM or to the Treasury Board President to pick up the phone and call someone else?
I appreciate the question. You will understand that I was not there at the time, so I'm just going to read from the notes I have, if you don't mind. January 29th,
let me just stop you right. Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Let me ask Mr. Ferguson, how do we ever move forward with addressing these issues when and it's not your fault, but how will we ever address this stuff when all we hear is, well, I wasn't here at the time? And I'm not blaming Ms. LeMay for flicking the switch, because you weren't here at the time. But how do we get past this? Because all we hear, and I'm aghast at how the Treasury Board...
I do need to be very helpful
Mr. Ferguson.
Here. I am trying to be helpful.
Mr. Ferguson.
And then I need to be clear.
So again, that's one of the cultural issues that I identified in the message, was the fact that the tenure of deputy ministers in these positions, there were 4 different deputy ministers, I believe it was. I mean, including Ms. LeMay coming in right at the very end in PSPC in that time period.
Mr. Warnock said the time period was perfectly fine, nothing to worry about with the length.
Well, again, that
I'm not talking to you. Thanks.
That type of turnover of deputy ministers, I believe, is something that is problematic. We see it all of the time in our audits when we do an audit and then we come back with a follow-up audit. I think sometimes there is in fact a third deputy in the middle there, right? So that we do the audit under one deputy minister. By the time we come back and do a follow-up audit, it's a whole other deputy minister, and you get that same answer of, well, I wasn't there at the time, and there's nothing they can do about it. No. They weren't there at the time. But again, fundamentally, I think it's a factor of the fact that there is so much churn and so much rapid churn at the deputy minister level.
Great. And Mr. Wallace, I'm not blaming you because you weren't there, but how does it...
I need to be very clear about why...
Colleague, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm not blaming you. I'm just figure like this is an explosive report that anyone would have said, oh my God, this has to go to the very top.
And I understand that point.
How does Treasury Board just not pass it on to anyone?
I understand that point fundamentally, and the reason that I referred to that is because I'm about to give you information. The other information I give you is information of which I have direct knowledge because I am there. I'm just trying to explain to you that I'm explaining something that I know indirectly rather than directly. So that's my only point, to make sure that you understand very clearly the accountabilities, because you have clearly seen that I will accept the accountability and I will act accordingly. So January 29th, 2016, the Gartner report was communicated in draft form, was communicated by the Controller General of to the Associate Deputy Minister and Assistant Deputy Minister of Public Service Procurement Canada. So these are not low-level officials, just to be very clear. It's correct. It's transmitted in the appropriate way.
The Controller General is a very high level. Would he have read the report, seeing as he paid $250,000 for it?
I cannot imagine that. So again,
I'm sorry, you can't imagine he would have read the report?
No. Just
one
moment, please.
Okay, so that's what I'm getting at. So the Controller General very high-ranking position, receives a very explicit report saying, you know, we're in big trouble here, and he doesn't send it up his ladder to the deputy minister or the treasury board president, and doesn't send it to a deputy minister. Like if I have people in my riding who can't get pay. I've got Ms. LeMay can attest. I've gone and bothered Ms. LeMay and Mr. Linklater about getting Phoenix pay issues settled. I know enough to go to the top. When I had a Gardner report, why would it not be just common sense to go to the very, very top?
So to be very clear, and I understand and appreciate the question, it's not one I can answer in detail because I was not there. The information I can provide you with, and you understand that point, and you understand the reason why I say that very clearly, you also understand and appreciate that the issues here are deeply fundamental. And you also understand and appreciate, because we are having this dialogue, that we welcome this dialogue. And we understand from a public service perspective, I am a new deputy. I have spent a considerable period of time in the Government of Ontario, privileged to lead that, privileged to be the Treasury Board Secretary, privileged to be the Deputy of Finance, privileged to lead the City of Toronto, that I understand and accept the accountabilities fundamentally, and that one of the core things we are working on here collectively as part of this dialogue is to ensure that the notion of communication is an absolutely critical element of that. So to be very clear, I accept the orientation of your question and accept responsibility for driving that message forward That is why I'm here.
Comment about everything being designed for people not to be accountable.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley.
So I do believe that is a fundamental governance issue, and when we look at this in retrospect, as the report does, we do need to understand that governance is critical for these aspects. There have been huge strides in governance, but they are only as good as the values, the intention, the commitment to implement and live with those values. And whether it is designed or works out that way, any governance structure has to have accountability, clear lines of communication at the appropriate level, fundamentally built into that. I went through a list of measures that we have undertaken to do that, but I've also indicated to you that we intend also to pursue the very significant shifts required to make sure that we live those values.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about accountability, and I think it goes back to what Mr. McCauley and Mr. Christopherson, and we all recognize that it's hard sometimes to, get some of the answers when you have 4 deputy ministers through the tenure, and the current one, was there for the second launch, but wasn't the one making the decisions. I find it hard to believe that there isn't a sign-off just from other departments on other things. There's always sign-offs, it seems, but how it can be designed with no sign-off is frustrating. 3 of these deputies are gone. Some of them not even in the public service anymore. Minister Foote is long gone, back to Newfoundland, and we still have problems, and I still have constituents not being paid properly, and I still have town hall meetings that are being taken up with Phoenix issues, and it's because people are missing house payments and missing car payments because they aren't getting paid. And so all of us on all sides need the department and need the government I'm glad to hear some of the measures that you've put in place. I think that's positive. And certainly I hope these are lessons that we've learned. We know what happened. We're still trying to find the way on why some of it happened. So I thank you for being here today, and we are now adjourned.